This is now day 2. This is the day of the body and healing. Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the second day, which is the day of the body and healing and how to keep balance in your life and in your body. So we're focusing on physical stuff all day today. I hope you wore casual clothes this morning. Simple, because we're going to be doing work on the ground and everything else. And so I'm going to start right in. But the first thing I want to ask is how many people here are healers? Now, I know everybody is a healer. I mean, if you cut yourself, who does it? Who fixes it? You do. We are all healers. But who's doing this professionally? I just want to count that number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 38 people. Okay. Because when we get down into the little beds that we form for the healing, I'd like those 38 people to kind of be evenly dispersed across there, so every bed has somebody that is used to doing healing, understands that kind of thing. I'm going to talk about my experience with healing, and you're welcome to put your experience in at any time if you feel it needs to be added to or taken away from. I totally believe in negative and positive understandings of things so we can find what the truth is. But I'm just going to go for what has taken me my entire life to understand. And a lot of these things are going to be, for some of you, you go, oh yeah, I know this. And for other ones, it'll be stuff that you've probably never heard before, and you're going to go kind of twist your mind a bit. But the first thing is that nothing happens in the body without other components affecting it. In other words, if anything happens physically in your body, it isn't just a physical thing. We have 4 parts to us. And let me just write this out. I put it into a tetrahedron. See, so I'll put it like this. So this is a tetrahedron sitting on a table. And this is spirit up at the top. And then we can just put, this is the mental body. I know you're a long ways away, but that says mental body. Emotional body and physical body. And so our spirit, or some people call it a soul, and our mental body and our emotional body and physical body are linked together, from how I see it, in a tetrahedral form. And there, if anything happens on any of them, there's always these other components that are connected to it. You can't talk about one of them without talking about the other. So when we're talking about the physical body, there is always these other 3 aspects that are deeply affecting this. And on Earth today, the biggest one is the emotional body. At least that's what I've found. The emotional trauma that we have is one of the primary causes of disease. And so if you use allopathic medicine, which doesn't recognize this, and you have a disease and you take medicine to cure that disease or to get rid of the symptoms, if you haven't dealt with the other aspects, especially the emotional one, it's just going to come back some other way. You haven't cured the problem. You've only just worked with the symptoms. And so you get rid of cancer and it comes back as something else because you haven't gone enough. This is so basic to me that I want to see if anybody has a different idea about this or feels differently. Is there anyone that feels differently? Okay, that's good, because sometimes people don't get this, but this is a basic point that I had to bring forth. The other aspect that is, to me, is essential. Now, I know that a lot of healers don't think that this is essential, but I'm giving you my opinions, and that is that you have to have permission to do healing. You can, even if you were this amazing person that could just wave their hand, and if I came in here and just waved my hand over all of you to heal everything you had, I would be doing more harm to almost all of you than you can imagine. And there would be a lot of higher selves that would be really angry at me. Because we create things within ourselves for more than just, we have reasons why we do things. And a lot of times healing produces responses that we need to deal with it. We have something that we're trying to deal with very often from a past lifetime, and we have to know if that illness is there, if that the person has worked through what that is about, or if they have not. And so when I ask, personally, it took me a long time to understand this too, I not only ask the person for permission, because they almost always will say yes, but they don't know what's good for them. And the next thing that I found is crucial to me is to ask a higher level. And you could go to your own higher self, but I found that it's better if I go to their higher self. And if you go to their higher self and ask if it's appropriate for you to do this, they'll either tell you no and go away and leave them alone, or they'll tell you, they'll give you yes. The body knows what is wrong, and if you can ask the body. But when you're talking in those levels to the body, most people can only ask yes or no questions. That isn't, if you're advanced enough, you can go in and actually talk to the body and have a discussion with it, and it'll tell you more than just yes or no questions. But if you go to the higher self has a viewpoint far expanded over what the body sees, and is able to tell you, if you wish, exactly why you either do something or do not something. And you can even ask it, and this took me about 8 or 9 years to understand, and it was by accident one time. It felt like accident. In fact, I'll even tell that story in a little bit. And I asked permission from the higher self to do a healing on someone, and the higher self said yes, and then I started to say thank you and move away from that, and it says just a minute, and it says, you can ask me more. I can tell you exactly what to do. This becomes really interesting because a lot of times what they tell you to do is not in anything that you've ever probably heard before, because they know, they're surgical, they know exactly what to do to solve the problem. And very often it falls outside of what we normally think is healing. I'll give that example in just a moment. And so permission is important, and the means of asking how to get to higher self this falls into the same kind of category where for you guys about the Merkaba, it took a long time to understand that there were these shapes around you that you can't see or feel or anything. And the higher self is just another level of the same kind of ability that we have to communicate. And it is something that you'd have to do through, if you don't know how many people, let me just put this, how many people actually do know how to talk to someone's higher self? So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. There's 18 people in here. And those 18 people have an incredible advantage over other healers because of that. I'll tell the story right now. Which one was it? Oh yeah, this one. I went in, I was in Taos, New Mexico, a long time ago. I don't remember when. It was probably in the 90s, early 90s, I think. Oh no, it was in the 80s. This is when I was really beginning. This is maybe 86 or 7, somewhere in there, I remember now. And it was a friend of mine, and we weren't boyfriend, girlfriend, she was the friend, but we were very close, and she just got sick one day, and she just kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and then she was in the hospital, and they thought she may die from this. I don't remember what it was she had. And so I went in, doing to help her because I loved her and I wanted to help her. And so when I was in there, I asked her if I could have permission to try to help, and she said yes. And then I went to her higher self. And her higher self, that's what he said yes, that she had completed everything on this and that it was fine for this to go away now. So I said, okay. And that's when I started to back away from him, and the higher self says, just a minute. And he says, you can ask me exactly what to do. And I had never thought of that before. And so I said, well, what do I do? And so he told me something that he would never come up with this. He said, he gave me an image of a teddy bear, a little brown teddy bear about that big. And he says, you see it? And he says, yeah. And he says, you got to get one that looks just like this. And I said, okay. And he says, and a single rose, on a single stem, and a little rose, the stem was about that long, and the rose was about this big, and it was a bud that was just starting to open. And then he says, I can't remember the order. There was an order. I had to hand her the teddy bear or the rose first, and then the next one, and then I had to say a sentence. And the sentence was very precise, and he made me say it, and he made me say it a couple times. He says, it's got to be perfect. And I said, okay. So I got this sentence down. I don't remember the sentence either anymore. And so I went and collected up these items the best I could, and I came back, and she was asleep at the time, and the nurse came in, and I waited until she woke up. The nurse did some things for a little bit, and then she left, and then I went over, and I waited a few minutes. I talked to her for a little while because she was just kind of waking up, and then when she was really kind of awake, I said, I got a gift for you. And she says, oh, goody, And so whatever it was, I think I gave her the teddy bear first, and she goes, oh, thank you, and I gave her the rose. She goes, oh, thanks. And then I immediately just said the sentence on what it was. And she just looked at me like that, and it was like I slapped her across the face, and she just started going crazy, kind of. And then she started crying, and she started crying and crying and crying and crying, and I left her like an hour later, and she was still crying. And the next day, everything went away. It was just completely gone. And it was something her dad gave her this gift and said something, and I don't think she ever saw him again. And the the emotional impact of that was now making her sick many years later. And so the human body is not as straightforward as it looks. The diseases are not what we think they are. They're much more complex. Even accidents. There are no accidents. We're creating everything all the time. You've got to come from that point of view to understand life. We're creating every single thing that happens to us. And so I'm just beginning to give to you what I've learned, and hopefully it will help. There's another huge area in healing that is very often overlooked, and it has to do with the person and the healer, both of you. What you believe is true, whatever that is like a cage you're in. It's walls, and you can't get beyond those beliefs. And so you're limited by them, and so is the person that you're dealing with. And so if they have belief patterns that are different than yours, it does help if you kind of know a little bit about them in terms of what they believe is true. But these belief patterns are huge. We can go back into the stories of Jesus, and there was a time when he was walking on water. We'll remember this one, and there were two boats out in the water with the disciples in them, and he's kind of standing there in water, and they're looking at him. And when you see somebody breaking your belief patterns, it has a really big effect on you. You know, somebody flies around this room, you're going to go, well, I want to do that, you know. and so it was Peter who it impacted. And it could have impacted all of them. They all could have ran out there, but it only impacted one to the level that they could actually do it. And so Peter gets out and says, well, I can do that too. And he walks over and stands next to Jesus on the water. But something happened in Peter. One cell somewhere in his body, who knows, it could have been on his big toe or in his finger somewhere or something like that. One little cell says, walking on water, Peter, are you crazy? He immediately fell into the water because he had a doubt. And this is what belief patterns are about. It's 100% one way or the other. There's nothing in the middle. You either can believe it or you don't. And if even a tiny, 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 tiny little piece of you doesn't believe it, you don't believe it. It's not enough. It's all the way or nothing. And so this is what we're all faced with as we try to get into higher consciousness, because we've got all these things around us that are stopping us because we don't believe all this stuff, and we have to get through it somehow. And it's not easy. I mean, it's a human dilemma. It really is. Oh yeah, Master Joe. I'm just going to write an address down here. I'm going to talk about somebody and the things I'm going to say are pretty hard to believe. But if you don't believe it, go talk to him. He'll show you. He'll actually show you what I'm talking about, and he loves to show you. He is Master Joe is his name. He's a Chinese American. He lives in Los Angeles. He's a little tiny guy, and he's in his 80s, I think. He acts like he doesn't speak English, but he does perfectly. He's a translator is when he's in the room. I think it's to be dramatic. But he's a really pure person, and I think he's 11th generation Qigong master. And this guy is truly a master. He really knows what this is about. And So I'm going to put his name and address and phone number on here because he has helped a lot of people get through their belief patterns better than most people can. This is his name, and so it's Z-H-O-E, but his name is said Joe, just like Joseph. And the address where he is 2001 South Barrington Avenue. For the filming crew, this is rather convenient. He's in West LA. And you'll understand in a minute why I'm spending so much time writing down this address. Master Joe came to Sedona. Well, he was actually here just recently, but he was here 10 years ago or more. I'm not sure when. And he had a little ad in the newspaper asking for people if they wanted to watch. And my wife, Claudette, happened to see it. And she just instantaneously, yes, this person, no, not this person. She saw him, she just, oh, I want to go see him. And she asked me if I wanted to, and I go, I don't think so, you know. And so she came to wherever it was, and there was about this many people there. And the first thing he did was he brought 2 chairs out, only didn't have arms on them. They were just flat, one chair like this, and it was already there. And then he had another chair about that far away, facing each other. And then he brought out a piece of paper, rice paper, but it was stretched on a little thin black frame, and the paper was about this big. And it was stretched tightly, so you could see it was tight. And he passed it around the room so everybody could see there was a piece of paper and not really steel or something like that. And they could see it was just a light piece of paper. And then the last person came, and he had them place it across the chair, so it was on both chairs and just suspended on that. Then Master Joe stood up on the chair and stood over on the paper. He's now standing on a piece of paper. There's about that much difference between standing on paper and standing on water. That much, nothing. And that's how he began his lecture. So he's standing on the paper, and the next thing he does, he has somebody pass around a bowl of water. It was a Pyrex bowl, so you can see through it. And he wanted everybody to touch it so they could see that it was room temperature. The next thing they did is they brought it and put it into his hand. Somebody from the audience, so it put it in his hand, and he just looks at it, and in about 2 seconds, he boils the water. The water's actually boiling, and you can put it down in boiling water. And then the next thing he did would probably break almost everybody's belief patterns, because this is off the scale. This is even more than things that Jesus was doing. He took some baby clothes, about 2 years old, little tiny baby clothes, and right before their eyes, he shrank his body into a little tiny person and put on these baby clothes. That's why I put his address up there, because you never believe me. And so he gave his lecture on healing and Qigong. And then afterwards, in this little tiny body with these little tiny clothes and all that, standing on a piece of paper. And then afterwards, when they were leaving, Claudette was starting to leave, and he says to Claudette, he says, "You, come here." And he says, "You can do all this stuff, you know." And he says, "I could show you right now. You're just that far away." And she goes, "No, it's okay." And she starts to walk away. And he says, No, come here." He says, You're so close." He says, "Let me just show you." And she goes, "Oh, okay." And so he lays her down he goes into another room, and he lays her down on a thing, and he puts wet towels that had been wrung out, but they were wet, and he took about that many of them and put them on her back. Then he puts his left hand behind his back, is where he's drawing the prana, or the chi from his point of view, from nature, and his other hand on the towels. And when he does, all you hear is tss. And then she says, it felt just like you're within about a second, like you're going to be burned. And then he'd move it to another spot, and he was doing this and letting her feel the energy. And so anyway, she came back home, and she tells me all this stuff. And I'm going, well, I want to feel the energy. You didn't tell me it was going to be that good. So I run down there. I said, "Master Joe." I'm Gladys' husband. "Can you show me that stuff?" And he was laughing. He goes, "Okay, sure." So he lays me down. I take off my shirt and lays me down. He puts the towels on there, and and I'll tell you, it was incredible. I mean, incredible. It just felt like it was going to burn me. And right at the moment when I felt it was going to burn me, he would move it to another spot and move around. But Qi can be hot. I just watched a video of another Qigong master who just took paper and broke it into flames, and you could see it start burning. So anyway, we became friends after that, and I at one point I asked him if I could bring a filming crew in from Hollywood to film all this stuff. And he said, oh yeah, sure, no problem. And so I got us all together and we went down to his office, and it just looks like a suite in another building, you know. And his secretary was this about a 50-year-old Chinese woman, very sweet person. And here we're with cameras and all this junk and stuff. And she says, well, you got to sit down. He's working on someone. It'll be about a half an hour. And so we said, okay. We're all just sitting there, you know. And she comes back a moment later and she goes, oh, Mr. Joe was just on television a week ago. She says, would you like to see what happened? And we go, yeah, sure. So she rolls a television up to us, you know, on a little stand, and puts in this. I think this was a long time ago. I think it was actually a VCR that she put in there. And he had just been on that show, That's Incredible. You remember that? It's very appropriate for him. And I don't remember all of it, but what I do remember is the first thing they did was they took a temperature gun, what looks shaped kind of like a gun, and you can aim it at anything in the room, and you hit the trigger, and it gives you a readout of the temperature. So you can, whatever it is, you don't have to actually go over to it. You can just look at it, and it'll tell you what it is. And they were describing to the audience how it worked and showed the little thing on the side. They first did that. Then the next thing, when they open the curtains, there's a giant round kiln about so big inside of there. And but it's off to the side, and there's this guy in an asbestos suit with a mask and these long tongs on there, you know, and so nobody knows what's going to happen. And then they take a piece of metal, steel, that's about this long, about that wide, and maybe a quarter-inch thick. It was pretty heavy. Looked like it was a pretty heavy piece of steel. And the guy with the tongs puts it in the end of his tongs and holds it away from him like this. And Master Joe walks in, puts one hand behind his back, puts his hand up like that, and you see up in that little corner the little temperature gun that's aiming at this thing, and instantly, I mean instantaneously, when he goes like that, the number is going like that. And after about, it wasn't very long, 30, 40 seconds, the metal starts turning orange. And he was heating that piece of metal up to orange hot. I don't know how hot that it is. It's probably 1,800 degrees or something like that. And you know, everybody's going, wow. And then the guy drops that, and he goes over to the kiln, and he takes a piece of metal out that had been heated to white hot. White hot has got to be hot. I don't know how high, what the melting point of steel is, or whatever that was, but this thing was white hot. And you can even be near stuff like that. We're working with things like this right now, and you just open a kiln, and I mean, when you get around something that hot, the heat is tremendous. And so he's holding it up like that, and Master Joe walks over to it, and they put a close-up on this, and here's the piece of metal like this, and he goes, he licks it. He runs his tongue over the top of it. He does it twice. And then he sticks it in his mouth and bites off a piece and spits it out. And everybody in the audience goes, that's incredible. It was incredible. And then he did a bunch of other things that were like that. We were watching that, and we were kind of almost at the end of it, and then he comes out, and we went and did a filming with him. And so this is a man who is truly a master, definitely understands this whole thing about belief patterns. And if you want to, he also is a healer. He can heal almost anything. And but you can never heal something that somebody does. If you don't want to live, if you don't want to be healed, I don't care who you are, you can't heal them. It doesn't make any difference. If they want to go, they have the right. They can go. Oh yeah. healing that I watched take place in my life. I was also in Taos, and it was also within a year of that other one with the teddy bear. And this was the importance of asking permission. This was another woman that I was friends with, and she was completely healthy. She was in her late 20s, I think. Nothing wrong at all. And in a single day, she got sick and had to go to the hospital, and they told her she had 3 days to live. It's kind of shocking. And when I went there to see her, I did the same thing. I asked her if I could try to help, and she said yes. But when I brought in her higher self, I never have before or since or ever before had a reaction like this. The higher self just says, "No, leave, go away." And I went, "Wow." You know, I was almost offended in a way. It was so aggressive, and so I just told her, I says, "I'm sorry, I can't do anything. There's nothing I can do." And I just gave her a big hug, a long hug, because I figured when I leave here, I'll probably never see her again. And I left. But what happened was, right about when she was supposed to die, she figured it out herself. She figured everything else out. She figured out exactly what had happened, when, the whole thing. She changed it. She healed herself. And she walked out of that hospital perfectly whole without anybody helping her at all. And that was the point. That was why the higher self was so aggressive, because it knew that she was right there, ready to do this. And if I had messed around at that time, it would have been the worst thing ever. And so you really have to be careful. You don't want to interfere with someone. It's not a good thing.
I wanted to ask, you said that you use the chi from the base of the spine, and only there are meditation using kundalini from the base of the spine. If you can say something about the relationship between that use and the prana that we use from way down and way up, the apexes of the...
You mean how it enters into the body?
Yeah, because when we use in the Merkava the prana, we see the flow come from up and down, and there are uses of chi that come only from the base of the spine. So,
well, there's lots of ways of looking at this, and China has looked at what we're doing with the Merkaba, and their response was, after they've studied it, is that they're calling it Western Qigong, because we are just pulling prana in from a dimensional level rather than from this dimension. We're pulling it from the fourth dimension or higher, depends on how you set your tubes. And so in this sphere that you have right here, you have super concentrated prana, stronger than anything you can get from using your hand to pull from nature. But we're not applying it in that way yet, because we haven't, that's not been taught. All we taught was how to do it. But in essence, anything that you know about Qigong can be applied directly from this, using this sphere of energy where it's coming in. You can pull that energy, you can send it around your body, you can send it out through your chakra points, you can send it out through your eyes. There's all kinds of ways you can do it. And it's still, prana is prana, only this is like super concentrated prana. And now, in terms of the spine, from my understanding, what they're doing is they're not they're pulling it from nature itself, and then into the spine through there. But the indigo kid, not the indigo kids, but the super psychic kids that are around the world, and especially the ones from China, they're doing something that I've never seen ever. And they pull the energy in between the fourth and fifth lumbar at 90 degrees. So they have it coming in like this, making a 90-degree turn and going up, completely missing the base of the spine altogether. And I thought it was strange, and I tried it. It seems to work. But why they're doing that, I still don't know. And basically, if you've been studying Qigong, anything that you know about Qigong, once you have the prana, how you apply it, that's the part that most of us don't know too much about, because maybe the 38 people here do, but most people don't have any understanding of how to use prana. A real quick thing. Prana, each one of the 5 platonic solids, and we're missing the tetrahedron, are the elements. There are 6 elements, not 5 or 4. There's 6 elements in existence. There's fire, earth, air, water, ether, and void. And ether is prana, or chi. And when you look at these shapes, this is fire is the tetrahedron, which is the diagonals of this, so they're interconnected, and this is earth, and yet inside of the earth, you're going to see, if you connect the 6 faces together, you get an octahedron, which is air, and the air connects to this one, because inside of air is an octahedron also, and this is an icosahedron, which is water, and water, if you connect the centers of the 12 pentagons, you get these 2 things are duals. They connect together. This is the outer shell of your entire Merkaba field. There's a sphere that contains it all, and these 2 things interconnected together, which is this one here. That's these water and ether, water and prana together creates this, and this is the Christ consciousness grid, or the unity grid that's around the earth right now. And this is what is going to save humanity, this thing, and it's a living field up there. But the thing about what I was about to come to was that prana is connected directly to void, and void is the sphere. Void is the vacuum is the void, which is infinite energy, near infinite energy. It's hard to imagine how much energy there is in almost nothing. In 1 cubic centimeter of space with nothing in it. And it doesn't matter if you're inside the middle of a rock or if you're in deep space and it's an absolute complete vacuum. That 1/4 inch has enough energy based on E equals mc squared to create the entire universe that Hubble telescope can see. And that's in every physics book in the world. It's fact. They know it. It still blows their mind, but it's true. And that's what people, these free energy machines that are coming up, and some people call them 0 point, which is not a good name, because I was just with Dr. William Teller. We were on radio together, and I used the 0 point. He goes, no, 0 point is absolute zero, which is Kelvin degrees. And so some people are linking that concept with the vacuum, which are really 2 different things. I never realized that before. But so prana contains water, water contains air, air contains earth, and earth contains fire. And so if you have prana, you have everything. This is why right now there are over 50,000 people on Earth, scientifically, that have been mapped, that do not eat food or water. They don't drink water, they don't eat food. They don't have to. And they found 5,000 babies in China that never ate or drank anything from birth, ever. They're fine, they're totally healthy. These people, and they usually don't sleep either. They sleep usually only about an hour and a half a day, which is the same length of time that dolphins sleep, is an hour and a half a day. And so their sleeping process is brought way down. They have major amounts of energy. They never are tired. They're super energized. And you can synthesize every molecule in existence, organic molecule in existence, no exceptions, just by prana. So that's how important prana is. It is the key to life. And when we go fourth dimensional, we will not eat or drink anything either in that world. We simply won't need to, and we won't even think about it. And you can do this right now if you want to. There's a woman, Jasmine, who is teaching this. If you want to, you can learn how. My publisher is Conrad, is his name, and we went to, he picked me up at the airport one time. No, he's dropping me off at the airport one time. And so I went to the restaurant, and I was just eating something, and he wasn't eating. And I said, "You're not hungry?" And he goes, "No, I don't eat it anymore." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I finally read Jasmine's book, and I just did it, and I don't eat food anymore." He hadn't eaten a bite in 6 months, or water, either one of them. And the other thing about it is that he says he's learned that you can put an on and off switch on it. And so you can eat for 6 months and stop for 6 months and eat for 6 months, or anytime you want, you can just stop eating. It's kind of a handy thing to know. Jasmine? Okay, it's Jasmine. And you can just go on the internet and find out. She wrote a book called Living on Light, where it took 21 days to be able to convert over, which really has to do with breaking down your belief patterns about that you need food. And so you come to the place where, okay, I don't need food. Then as soon as you believe that, you don't need food. But there's a science behind it. I mean, it isn't just that you're doing it. There's a reason. Once you know how to breathe prana, which you all do through the Merkaba, you can take this sphere and not eat. I've really thought about doing this. But the reason, I wasn't too concerned because I know that as soon as we go to the fourth dimension, we just automatically don't eat food. But it's interesting to me because she's actually interpenetrating the fourth dimension by moving that into the third dimension. But I still didn't get interested until recently. She has another one that she's doing where she does it with in Thailand with Mantak Chia, who's a Chinese Tantra master. And he has a special house that is completely black inside, and the people that serve you have goggles on with it. They can see at night and all this stuff. And they take you in there for 10 days in total darkness. And in 10 days, you come out, and you're able not to eat food or water again. And that particular number of days was interesting to me because that's what the Kogi and the Arawakos and the Wiwas and the Kanguamos do in South America, in Colombia, is they go into totally dark rooms and they do this little dance that they do for 9 days and 9 nights with no food or water. And when they come out of that, it puts them solidly into their heart forever. And that was the way that they actually wanted me to put you into your heart first, but I had to explain to them that we were too weak. we couldn't stand up for one night without food or water or sleep. You don't sleep either, nothing. And it's the 10th day when this thing happens that I felt I wanted to do what she was doing to see what the relationship was between the heart. If you're actually, what's really going on is you're going into your heart. And there is where you're making the change. And I have still a strong feeling that's what's happening. But I don't know. I used to work with this guy, Bob Dratch. And he's an extremely brilliant person. He's so brilliant they can't measure him. The way that Bob Dratch worked is that he would use his left brain logically to create what he was creating. He knew exactly where he wanted to go. But whenever you get somewhere and he had to know a certain frequency or something else, normally with a scientific method, you had to start doing experimentation and everything to figure out what it was. He didn't have to do any experimentation ever. He would just get to that point, and as soon as he did, he'd go, okay, I need to know what this is. He would just close his eyes, go into the right side of his brain, and ask, what is it? And the number would come, he would put it down, work perfectly, and keep going. And so it was pretty extraordinary what we were able to do in the length of time we were able to do things. And one of the things that we created, or he created really, but he was using me in the sense that I was giving him the understanding of sacred geometry and how that worked in it. Once he got it. He got it really fast. And so he made this instrument that when you looked at it, a normal scientist would not have any idea how this thing worked. For one thing, the electrical circuits aren't even connected. He discovered that on the walls in Egypt and on the walls of the Celtic drawings that were in Ireland, etc., that many of those were actually electrical circuits. And they were into electronics. It's now been proven scientifically conclusively that Egypt was into electronics above and beyond what we are now. And the military is kind of going crazy over all of this. In fact, right behind here in Sedona, the Egyptians were here in Arizona a long time ago. There's no doubt about that if you've done your research on it. In 1905, they found a cave that went 1,400 feet off the Colorado River, and they went down into it, and there was all these mummies, Egyptian artifacts, Egyptian writing, everything else. And then in 1925, they found a whole mountain, which was called Isis Mountain, unfortunately, to give them away. And they went in there, and again, they pulled out all kinds of Egyptian stuff. It was both of those events were written in the Arizona Gazette. One of them was 6 pages long, with all the photographs and everything, and the other one was earlier, but it was all, again, explained everything. And then a man, we have his name, but I don't know it right now, from this group of the government, this one particular person didn't like the idea that the Egyptians were here before Christopher Columbus, and took all of these artifacts and put them on a barge out into the Atlantic and dumped them in the water. And that's been documented also. He just didn't want us to change our ideas about this. And so, but right now, they found another mountain next to Isis Mountain for over 15 years now. There's been a huge fence around it. Military's there, all dressed in black with little machine guns. If you try to get in there, you're probably not going to make it. And it's even a no-fly zone, 10,000 feet. You're not even able to fly over it. And whatever is in there has really intrigued them. In Egypt, it would take me 3 or 4 hours to tell you the story, but they found the underground city in Egypt. It's 8 miles long, 6.5 miles wide, and it's one building 12 stories deep. And remember in the book we said that it'll hold 10,000 people, and they now are in there, absolutely. And they've been in there since 1997. And they have found electronics in there beyond anything we have ever understood at all. And so a Motorola paid $60 million for a little tiny building just to get access into there. A little Adobe building that was probably worth 10 cents. And so they've also, right behind here, out at Boynton Canyon, behind the enchantment place, the enchantments now has been bought by the military. And they have built underground tunnels from there over to where this place was, and down inside where they have found, we believe that it's Egyptian stuff also, because they just will not let go of this one. It's too big for them. And so a lot of the people going to this resort over here, they're driving up in civilian clothes, but they're really military. And it's okay. They're trying to understand the ancient past and how it can be applied into the present, and that's just a normal thing to do. But what Bob did was he created an instrument that he called, it started out as the pulsed germicidal lamp, which is based on the technology that we're using. It was a mercury vapor lamp. We used that because it had been grandfathered by the FDA, and it had, and we were primarily going after the UV A, B, and C, and from that we had created an instrument that would heal all disease, every single disease in the world, and usually within 2 minutes. And they arrested us for that. They took everything away from us and wouldn't let us go because they just said you can't have something that cures everything. the United States, 1/7 of our gross national product is people dying and sick, and if you took that away, it would destroy us. Now, if it was Canada, it would be a blessing, because in Canada, it would actually solve a lot of their financial problems, but it doesn't here. And but anyway, we changed that little device after that, and we created something that you think that the medical community would go nuts over, because we were able to look inside the body without any evasive action. We're not putting anything into the body, no magnetic fields or ultrasound or anything else, because when you do, you are not seeing what's really happening. You're seeing what's happening because of that influence. And so you can't see the real time of what's really happening. But we had found a way to take the microwaves that are coming off of molecules. Molecules are vibrating and they're producing microwaves, but at a very low energy level. It's 3 or 4 degrees Kelvin. And we had figured out a way to, science normally thinks that if you look at something that's 3 or 4 degrees Kelvin, you have to make an instrument that's sitting at 3 to 4, you have to cool the instrument down physically down to 3 or 4 degrees. Otherwise, the instrument's vibrating so loud, you can't hear this very soft thing. That's not true. They just don't know how to make the right circuits. And so using what we learned out of Ireland, we created these spiraling circuits that you can adjust, but they're not connected to each other. But yet you have a board with them on there, and you can see the circuit's not connected, but you put electricity at this end, and it comes out the other end. A normal electrical engineer could not explain this by what he was taught in school. But that's what we were doing, and from there we were able to create an instrument that could look inside the body and watch anything. You could just watch the blood flowing through there, or watch the heart beating, or go in the brain and just watch it doing whatever you want. You could look at it for hours and hours and hours, and you're not doing anything, because all you're doing is, it's just like a photograph. You take a photograph and you're receiving light that comes off of the body. We were receiving microwaves that were coming off the molecules, and it's three-dimensional. It's not just on the surface, but it's inside the body. And so we could adjust our focus and go into any particular point and just watch what was going on, and without any evasion action. And that led us to a lot of discoveries about the human body that you probably wouldn't know normally. And there are so many things that the medical community has not even begun to understand yet, even what the blood vessels are and how they are formed. We don't really understand that. It looks like chaos. The Russians have figured it out. And from that, they have a whole science that is absolutely extraordinary. And we don't have any idea of that in the Western world over here. But one of the things that we could do was to find out where a person had their attention in their body. You could actually see it. It's interesting. You have a person standing here, and if you say you have your attention in this hand, there's a little sphere about that big, and it's glowing. And if they move the sphere up their arm and over here into their hand, you could actually see that little sphere going over there. Or if they just was here and then there, you would just see it here and appear over there. Depends on how they did it. But you could see where they were focused. And so this led us to a discovery. This discovery is really important to know if you're a healer. It'll change everything. It did for me. What we discovered from this is we realized, well, we can see where somebody is focused, where they're centered in their body. And that was kind of an interesting thing. And so we decided to start studying healers to see where they're focused. And we brought in a lot of healers. I don't remember how many. It was a lot, though. It was 80, 90, or 100. I mean, it took us a long time to do this. And we were picking people who had written books on the different techniques of healing. And so we were trying to get every technique that we could find and think of. And then so so we get the person, they'd be healing somebody on a table. They would start doing their thing, and we'd say, okay, tell us when you're doing whatever you're doing. And they'd say, okay, I'm doing it. And we'd go for it. And And we would scan not the person's body they were doing it, but the healer's body. And after a long time, it became pretty clear. Every single case, they were centered in their heart chakra. Every single case. What this told us was the healing technique doesn't mean much. The healing technique is to convince the healer they can do something. That's all it is. This is what does it. This is this connection of love through your sacred heart. That is where healing comes from. Here, that's what I believe at this point, and the science behind it was pretty convincing to me. And so the technique just gives you a way to focus your energy and how to do it, but you don't really need anything. You just can love the person. If you can't love the person, you can't heal. This was clear out of those two guys out of China that we talked about in another one a long time ago. There were two major psychic people in China. They were one of the earliest ones, and they're about the same age. One of them was one that was naturally born into it, and the other one was trained into it. The one that was naturally born into it, the Chinese people hate him. I mean, they're afraid of him. And the other one, they love him. They love him like Jesus. They love him. And so the one that they don't like is that his ego is so strong. I mean, he can do anything psychically. I mean, just anything. But he was one of the people who was able to walk through a solid wall. So was the other guy, could walk through a solid wall. But the guy that nobody likes or is afraid of is if he's in an audience like this and somebody doubts him or doesn't like him or puts a negative feeling toward him, he hurts them. He goes like this and sends a ball of flame and sets them on fire. I would not go to any of his things myself. Only watch it on TV. And I mean, he was just really not a nice guy. And the other guy, they just are all over him because he loves people. He can heal anything. But what's interesting is the guy that everybody loves, and he loves them, he can heal anything. Like I just said, he can just say it's gone and it's gone. But the other guy can do anything, but he can't heal. He cannot heal anybody of anything because he doesn't care what happens to them. And so if you're a healer, that's what it is. You just really have to love that person from your heart, from the depths of your soul, and you'll find a way to make it happen. Okay, so I'm just throwing out these bits of information that I've learned, and they're kind of turning points in my life. This is another one, and this one is crucial to how, not only for healing, but for everything. And when you're talking about healing, you're really talking about everything anyway. But in quantum physics, there are many things were learned in quantum physics that were never known or understood before. Now, quantum physics is probably not going to survive because there are other new theories that are coming forth right now that are so much better than anything that's ever come along before. Relativity, special theory of relativity, quantum physics, superstring theory, or any of these ideas that are coming out now, I believe, are just going to be discarded and thrown away because there are new understandings that are coming out. Even what Nassim is doing, but also what the Russians are doing. The Russians have something that's so extraordinary, it's incredible. And but anyway, looking at just quantum physics as it is right now, one of the things that was presented to this is that the person who is performing the experiment affects the experiment. They literally can change it. They can change the results just by what they believe is true. And so, this is a big problem. I'm going to get into that idea a little bit more tomorrow. The other thing in quantum physics is that you can see the universe in one of two ways. And you have to choose one. And you choose one, and you have to throw the other one away and not believe it. You can only believe one side or the other. But whichever way you do, will work. One is that everything is solid, and that it's just solid stuff. It is particles. We call them atoms, but they're little pieces of universe that you could put together to make everything up. So the idea of atoms, as we think of them with protons, electrons, and neutrons, is just a theory. They've had over 50 theories of what an atom is. They need to keep going through them until they got to the Bohr idea, and ever since then they use that, but I don't think most theorists really believe any of that stuff anymore because there's too many anomalies, and there's something wrong. But anyway, you can see it as either made up of particles, or you can see it as just energy, waveform, vibration, sound. And you can take your pick. Well, almost all scientists, when did quantum physics come out? It was 1930s, wasn't it? Somewhere around in there. Anyway, from whenever it came out until about the mid-90s or so, almost all physicists in the world were particle scientists. They didn't really understand it as energy at all. Bob Dratch was one of the first ones. And he's changing the world. And there are other ones now who are changing the world because they can do things. You can do if you see the world as energy and you throw away that other idea, there are things you can do that looks like magic from the other way. You just can't even begin to do those things because you've got another idea in your head that will not work on those levels. And so, going back to Qigong again, I'll give you an example. Greg Braden has a movie that he shows a lot that he picked up out of China. And you've probably, many of you have seen this. It's where there's a woman who has bladder cancer. And she's in China in a hospital that is called a medicineless hospital. They use no medicine to heal anything. They just use prana or chi or ki. And so in this hospital, this woman with the bladder cancer is lying on it looks like a normal hospital. She's lying on a table, looks like a normal hospital table. And there's a nurse there with a computer screen, and she's shining the ultrasound into her bladder. And you can see, and it's picking up on the screen, so you can see it's rather enlarged. The bladder's like about that big on the screen. And you can see the cancer in there. It's just this big black area that's inside there. That's cancer in her bladder, and so you can see this scientifically. And then these 4 young men come out, and they look like they're in their early 20s. They come out and put one hand behind their back, and they all go like this and aim it at there. And exactly what's going on in their heads, you don't know. But they're just doing that, and they're all at once, all 4 of them at once are healing this person. But you can see the computer screen, and you can see the cancer. And in just a little over 3 minutes, I don't remember the exact time, but it's approximately 3 or 4 minutes, you watch the cancer that was that big on the screen just go, poof, gone. Non-existent anymore. And if those people that were doing the healing thought of the body as a solid thing, they could not do that. They see the body as energy. It's like an allopathic doctor. It's like you have a guitar, and an allopathic doctor comes up to a guitar, and one of the strings is out. He goes, you got to replace it. Got to put a new string on here and tune it. But an energy person says, no, there's nothing really wrong. It's just not in tune. And so all you got to do is go, and everything's fine. You just tune back the energy back to where it's supposed to be, and then it's over. So it's a really different concept. And so an allopathic person, doctor, has to use a physical way to solve the problem. They have to give you a pill, a medicine, something physical to do it. If they have to go in with a knife or cut it out, because of the view that they have of the reality. But an energy doctor would not need to do any of that. There's other more simple, easier, faster, painless ways of doing this. And life, the medical community is beginning to understand this right now. It's just beginning to change. And, Canada made a huge shift here recently where they allowed medical doctors to use alternative methods. That's a no-no here in the United States. But up there they say, if it works, do it. Why not? Why not? If it works, why not? But you can't do that here. And so we're slowly beginning to understand this, and these kinds of changes take a long time. Even science itself, of physics, is just now beginning to understand what they said a long time ago. They're just beginning now to get it. And so I really recommend that you begin to change your view of what the outer world is made out of, rather than seeing it as solid and made out of hard little particles that create it, but you begin to see everything, especially the human body, but it has to take it to everything. It's just energy. And from this concept, Bob Dratch was one of the first people, and maybe the first person on Earth, to actually come forth with the word waveform and what it actually is. And we were able to do things pretty amazing. Waveform is if you take like this bottle, and which has water in it, this has a vibration. The vibration in all of its fullness is called waveform. If you look at mathematics and you just see sine wave signature, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a sine wave signature over time, and that is extremely complex. It's like looking at a mountain range with every little tiny rock and pine cone and tree on it. It's not just a line, it's a very complex up and down pattern within the pattern, and it's over time, so it's the pattern is actually changing. When you get a piece of that, if you took a waveform of this and then you created that pattern, poof, you have another bottle exactly the same, with precisely the same number of atoms in it, same number of atoms in or molecules of water in there, and everything exactly the same. There's no difference at all. And there's no difference in this reality either. It's a bottle of water, you can drink it. There's no difference. And it just came from energy. We were able to take, he made something called a God box, which is a little tiny box about an inch high and about this big, where you could take a medicine and convert it into waveform and then project it like you can television or anything else like that. So he could come in here with a certain medicine if you want to give it to you, and he could either aim it at one person or wideband it and shoot everybody in the room, and you'd all get this medicine. There would be no difference if you injected it or if you did it. Zero difference between the difference. And so it's like I was asked to go to a hospital in San Diego a few years ago, and there was a French doctor there that was using waveform. Only it was interesting because he was using light, what came off the surface of the body. And they used a menopause medicine. I don't really know what it was, but it had been around for a long time, and they knew it inside and out, and they knew all the side effects, and they knew everything about it. They had 30 years of research on this. And he simply took it and put it into a piece of cloth. He took the waveform, put it into a piece of cloth. The person would hold the cloth on their arm for 30 seconds, and it was exactly the same as if they took the pill. And we were doing it in a different way. We were using the microwaves, which I think is better because it's not linear off the surface, but it's three-dimensional. And we were taking that, and we put it into this little box, and we took 2,000 of them, 2,000 medicines. So it's kind of like Star Trek, where they have that little thing, and you could fix anything. Well, we actually have that. And one of the things we put in there was chocolate. It was our demonstrator. When somebody wouldn't believe this, you can't do that. Oh, really? And all of a sudden your whole mouth is filled with chocolate. Pretty good. There is no difference, not any. And if you did that with a human being, you could duplicate a human being. There'd be no difference. It'd be exactly the same body. Now the spirit would be a different. I don't know what would happen if you did that. I don't know what happens with spirit in that case. But waveform is getting to be pretty well understood, and lots of scientists and doctors are working with this now. There's a lot of everything is polarized. And so there's an extremely positive side, but there's an extremely negative side. We were commissioned by a group of medical doctors back east. Their problem was they were dealing with older people who, and the biggest problem with older people in medicine is they just forget to take their medicine. They can't remember to do it, and or they don't want to, whatever the reason. And so they wanted us to put it into so they could go over a telephone. And we made it, and it worked perfect. You could just so the person the telephone would ring, the person would pick it up, and it would just go, and that was it, and they could hang it back down, and all their medicine was just put into their body. That was another time we were stopped by our government. And I do see why they stopped us on this one, because oh my God, you can kill anybody. You can just put arsenic or something else through there and just eliminate it just by a phone call. But it's going to happen. You can't stop these things once somebody has thought about it and it's in the grids. Somebody's going to do it, either positive or negative. And so you could just do it over a TV station actually and kill 90 million people in 1 second. I mean, more than even thing. At the same time, you can put it over a TV station and heal them of everything, but not in 1 second. But it would, it would cause more problems. It's not. Anyway, science is there. Waveform is a matter. You can even buy things for. They have fuels that would increase gasoline mileage. Now they have it put into a little patch you stick on your gas tank. And you get 25% more horsepower and about 30% more gas mileage. And they have another company's come out with a whole series of little plastic patches for every conceivable problem you have, and that stuff really works. If you have allergies, you put these little patches on. Now you don't have allergies anymore. On and on and on and on. It's just waveform, and we're okay. I'm going to bring up one more thing, which because it's another healing tool, and the more I've worked with this healing tool, it's quite amazing. And my belief is that when you look at physical objects that do things, they're just teaching tools. If it can do it, you can do it. So every time I see how something works on that way, then I learn how to do it without it. And do the same thing once I get the concept of what it's doing. Okay, we got another question.
I wanted to know if you try to apply this waveform theory with a harmonizer instead of just sending the...
Oh yeah, that's what we were doing. The way that we were healing the atmosphere was through waveform technology. We would take a cloud right at the moment when it was lightning and starting to dump rain, and we took the waveform off of that and put that into a CD, and then transmitted that sound frequency, waveform frequency, through a toroidal field, and we expanded it out into nature, and it absolutely works.
And
For sure.
Did you try anything else besides the rain cloud?
Yeah, you can put anything through it. Again, we're back to that positive and negative thing, Hopefully the world will come into balance, but we are coming to a point here now, which I think is going to happen pretty soon, where all of our technology, we're going to throw it away in a single day, according to the prophecy. because you go back into the Vedas and they talk about this time right now, how we fly around in metal boxes and we learn about electricity and magnetism, and we developed this whole technology. This was 5,000, 6,000 years ago this was written down. And then they predict that the day will come where it'll be a single day where humanity will wake up and realize who they really are. And it isn't that we throw it away, we just don't need it anymore. What for? We can heal anything, we can do anything, anything we think or feel or imagine we can do. So technology just becomes obsolete. Yeah.
When you heal the planet, do you ask permission of Mother Earth? And if so, have you ever gotten a no?
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes, and yes, and yes. Anytime you do anything with the earth, it's my belief that you must ask her permission. You're working on her body. It's her body, and it usually will influence other people too, and so you have to ask permission. When we were using what he was talking about, these toroidal fields that would stretch out 35 miles, which we're now up to 6,000 miles, and it could easily be switched over to planetary. When she gives us the permission, which hasn't happened yet, we could connect into the Merkaba field of the Earth, at which point anything can be transmitted globally, all over, and actually from inside the Earth through it, universally to the entire universe. Okay, yeah, when we first started to do this, I didn't know if this was a good idea or not. I did a little test, and I could see for sure that it was real. And so before we used it, we were not far from here. We had 55 people, and we went and did a medicine wheel to ask Mother Earth if we should use this or not. And it was pretty dramatic because a white buffalo woman appeared to everyone in that circle. And she told us that we could do this, that Mother Earth wanted to know if this would work, but we had to be limited, and so we were limited to a 300-mile area. And so I've had a 300-mile area, which includes this place we're in right now, but centered in Payson, which is about 100 and something miles that way, 110 miles or so. And Payson has now become, and that was for environmental clearing of the atmosphere, etc. And Payson is now the cleanest place on Earth. Scientifically, the cleanest place. It went past everywhere. We even went past Iceland, which was the cleanest place, and they can't explain it. They're trying to say, well, it's the ponderosa trees are eating the pollution, but I don't think so. What it is we've had this field sitting there for a long time, running these frequencies, and you run the frequencies even for 15, 20 minutes, and you can see the difference. In 10 days, you can really see the difference. When you get up there on a clear day with no clouds, and you're up on a mountain, you see the mountains, and then you can see the mountains go right over the edge of the surface. It looks like there's no atmosphere at all. It just, you can even see the little tiny peaks going over the top of this thing there. And normally you can't see stuff like that because there's too much stuff in the middle. But there have been times when I have asked for permission to do things with Mother Earth, and she just said no, so I just don't do it. And you can ask her why too. She'll tell you why. You're her child. She loves you. She'll tell you if it's possible for her to tell you. She'll tell you why she doesn't want you to do that. What I want to talk about now were something called the DOS disc, and they're DOS. I don't even know what it stands for. It's Portuguese. It's from Brazil, and I was, and this is a case where yes, we have these physical things, but I've learned how to do what they do with just your hands. But I want to explain what they do. And you can buy these things if you want. It was not possible to buy them for a long, long time because they were medical instruments. But at any rate, it is possible to buy them now. They're expensive. They're not cheap. They're $3,000 or $4,000. But if you're a healer, they're pretty amazing. Is Cal here? Yeah, come on up.
Okay.
This is Cal Garrison. And she's the editor-in-chief of the Spirit of Mott and magazine. And she also has been kind of coordinating everything with these discs and what we've learned about them. These medical people, what they had found is they had discovered mathematically what this was. But the reason they came was because they had read my book. And they were like, how did I know that it was 34 this way and 21 this way? And because they had figured out all the spin ratios, the mathematics, the geometries and everything. And they were blown away by someone had just written a book on it. And they had spent 20 years to come to that conclusion. And so they'd ask me a lot of questions. And when we were all done, they asked me a million questions, actually. And then when we were all done, they said, well, would you like to try it? And so I laid down, and I didn't know what to expect, and they just put these discs on my chakras. And what they are is they are a healthy chakra. Perfectly healthy chakra. So when you put it on it, if you've got a blocked chakra where it's all out of whack and it's rotating incorrectly, very quickly it goes into a perfectly healthy system, which means all your energy's flowing in your body right and everything. And so they put them on me, and they said, you're probably going to go to sleep. And in my mind, I go, I don't think so. You know, and so they put them on my body, and I was just sort of talking, well, what do I do next? And I just went to sleep. You don't have a choice, kind of. I woke up like an hour and 15 minutes later and took them off, and you feel fantastic after this is over with. You just feel like you've had 2 nights sleep, you know, it's really great. And then they gave them to me. They said, we can't sell them to you because they're medical things, but here they are, we're going to give you a set of them. And then they left. They left, and 2 minutes later, a woman came in, and she was one of the women that was going to be in the workshop the next day. And she was telling me that she couldn't come because her husband had just decided that he didn't like her anymore and asked for a divorce that day before. And she was all red, and she'd been crying and everything else. And so I tried to get, after I said, well, that's okay, you know, it's not okay, but it's it's okay that you don't come to the workshop. We understand. And so, and then my little brain went, I wonder if I put them on her, what would happen? And I tried to convince her. I said, can I just lay these on you? She says, no, I don't care. I just got to go. I had to ask her a couple of times, and finally she said, oh, okay. She lays down. And she's sitting there talking about it. She says, my husband, he's such a jerk. And she was going on and on. And I'm putting these things on her. And she's in the middle of the sentence. She goes, and he... I goes, wow, that's what I did, you know. So I sat there, and it was like an hour or something before she came back. And she came back, and she was like a different person. She goes, wow, I feel really good. And I go, yeah. She stands up, and she goes, you know what? She says, I think I will come to your workshop tomorrow. And I says, what about your husband? She says, the hell with him. And so I took these back, and I started experimenting with lots of people, and I was incredibly impressed with all of this. And then years went by. I couldn't sell them. I could only have one set. And then years went by, and the medical community in Brazil had come to the place where there are no side effects on this that are known. You can't use them wrong. You can use them right, but you can't use them where it actually hurts anybody. And so they made it so you could sell them. And so we got them. When was that? I
think it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, about 2 years ago. And I can't handle these kind of things, so I asked Cal if she would take this on and begin to monitor what was happening from around these things. So just tell them what you found.
I love these things. And basically, you know what I call it? I call it the therapist in the box. All you healers out there, you know, you guys are going to be out of business. My experience with him is basically that everything that he said, I do sessions with myself. I've done sessions with other people. I've done all different kinds of things with people who don't know anything about this stuff. They always do the same thing, and the effects are the same. And depending on the person and their issues, you know, you're going to have to use them more or less. But let me tell you a little bit about my experience, okay? So we'll start there. So the first time I did it, everything was laid on me. I think it's best to do it when you're lying down, you're really comfortable, and there's absolutely going to be no interference, because you can go out from anywhere between 45 minutes and 3 hours. And what happens is the feeling is like as you're gliding into this experience, it takes between 5 and 15 minutes to sort of go out. But then during that time, you're in this space where there's nothing going on, there's nothing happening, you're not like aware of anything. It's like this total black space that you can't remember. You don't have any kind of big stuff happening, but after 3 hours, something in you opens its eyes and you look up, and all of a sudden at that point you realize that this process of getting all of your chakras to be spinning at the proper speed ratio, to have all of the star tetrahedrons in each chakra in the proper relationship to each other. This feeling of balance is so unbelievable. You feel like you've always wanted to feel. You actually, the healing process is sort of accumulative, so that every time you use it, you get better and you feel better. And not only do you feel better inside, but sometimes what happens is you get these insights into how to just clear up the mundane issues in your life. I had an office. I'd moved into this little house. I lived there for 2 years. I was in the middle of writing 2 books, and I didn't have time to arrange my office. And after my first or second disc session, I'd been procrastinating about dealing with this because it was like expensive and crazy. But I got up from a disc session. I'd gotten this information while I was in the session, I think. But I got up and I straightened the whole thing out in an hour. You know what I mean? And it didn't cost me anything. So you get all kinds of little practical tips. There's another thing that happens too, that you, sometimes you don't go completely out. Like, I love the ones where you don't even know where you are. There's another type of disc session where you go in and you're sort of like halfway between sleep and wake the whole time. And what happens is just these waves of imagery. They just keep coming over you, and there's information in that stuff. So you get to find out what you need to be looking at. I think they're the best ascension tool that I have ever seen. I think that everybody in the universe could get off Prozac and all the crazy stuff that people take because they make you feel great.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. You can take that. The thing is once you understand what they are and how they work, you can do it without them. And I mean, if you are a healer, there might be something you might want to use to understand it more and everything. But eventually, you come to the place where you got it.